Hey guys, it's Matt here. So, we didn't do much of an intro for this episode, and I thought I'd at least set it up a little better. So, I've been a big fan of Hamish and his band Cordrazine for a long time, and was just so thrilled when he was gracious enough to join us as he was making his way to the studio to record, which I thought was pretty cool, and I know Jon did too. So, Americans, or really anyone listening, if you haven't heard of Hamish, I highly encourage checking him out. He's a really great artist and a fascinatingly wonderful human being. I really hope you enjoy listening to this as much as we did recording it. And, yeah, here we go.
Good evening, dandies. Welcome to Undetermined, the podcast.
It was a lovely surprise to hear from you.
It was a very lovely surprise to hear back from you. I really wasn't expecting that. It seemed like a long shot to me, so I was just really very excited.
Yeah, Matt's been a big fan of yours for a long time, and told me about the invite, and I was like, oh well, yeah, that's cool. We'll see if anything comes of it, but that's cool.
Look, I always respond to messages. I do my best to, anytime someone sends a message, I just think it's polite to respond. That just seems like a normal human thing to do, to kind of
Right.
The idea of placing yourself above someone that's actually made an attempt to contact you for any reason, I kind of just find rude, and I don't understand it. Look, I appreciate there will be people out there that will get volumes of communication, that it is just not
Sure.
that it's not possible to respond to everything, but I
Right.
still think that you can try.
And that's the thing we find if we ever if somebody doesn't get a hold of it, a lot of people really are generally cool and they get back to us, and but we also can figure out pretty quickly. It's a good thing about social media. You can figure out pretty quickly who's suddenly become really busy. All of a sudden, I'll be like, oh, that was a bad time to send a invitation. You find out that they're on the road and they're touring all over the place or whatever. They got 50 shows back to back, and it's hit and miss, but
Yeah.
Well, you can be quite certain that I'm not going to be doing 50 shows back to back.
Yeah.
Well, and that's part of, and I maybe from a distance, the image that you seemed to have to me was somebody who very much valued his privacy too.
Mhm.
So I didn't have any expectation of, okay, this is going to be something that he's going to be comfortable doing.
Right.
And I would have respected that if that were the case.
Mm-hmm.
I think music and life is one of those interesting journeys that you go on. I am far more comfortable now having conversations than I was 10, 15 years ago. And I think probably then people were asking questions and hoping for a level of insight that I wasn't able to provide. So there was, at the time I would have suggested that the questions were intrusive and presumptuous, but I don't think that they necessarily were. I think that they were probably just uncomfortable for me because they were questions about myself that I had either avoided or wasn't ready to ask myself, and
Right.
And I think that's one of the interesting and challenging things about music. And look, I say music because that's my field of kind of creative pursuit. But I think it probably goes for any sense of expression that you're usually trying to find a way to connect with the world. Like your expression is is that medium that you're trying to understand yourself within your space. And
Exactly.
for most of us, it's trying to express or release something that's probably not great. And I think for most of us, we come into this field as quite fractured and vulnerable people. And
Right.
then
Sure.
then you're kind of thrust into a spotlight where people have, understandably, people want to be able to connect with you because they've connected with your music, and so they want to try and understand the person, and that makes sense. It's like if I think back to when I grew up, it's like I didn't want to just be like my musical idols. I wanted to be them. It's like any piece of any article that I could get, any piece of information, I would actually sit there and think, oh, I'm a bit like them, or they're a bit like me, and
Right.
try and find a
Sure.
way that I could, I those similarities that brought me closer to them. And it was a bit different then because I'm about to turn 47. So in my early days of obsessing about music, it was the content that you could access was controlled a lot more by the artist. They had more control over it, and
Sure.
you had to wait for a magazine article, or if you were lucky enough that someone was important or enough that there was a book or something written about them. But and you got to fill in the gaps. It's like there was a fantasy that you got to dream and imagine what someone was like. And I think for me, one thing that social media and the internet has done, the ability to sit and daydream and imagine what your idol would be like, that space has been eroded a little bit. But back in the day, that my comfort of having those open and transparent conversations was certainly not. I would have been less comfortable because.
Right.
Whereas now it's like, well, it's kind of an open book.
Right.
Sure. Well, your ascension to that spotlight was really pretty rapid too, and I would imagine that's a lot to take in, especially at a much younger age. You're still trying to figure out who you are and kind of find. I think our identity is always evolving, but when you've gone through something that big, I can't imagine there's a way to mentally or emotionally prepare for that.
I certainly wasn't prepared for it, and I was so unprepared for it, and we were so unprepared for it. But we recorded our EP, our first EP, Time to Leave, and we didn't expect anyone was going to listen to it or be interested in it. And in fact, the only reason that we recorded it, and we spent $1,500 recording it, and the only reason we recorded it was that it gave us the opportunity to try and approach a venue to request a launch show. So it was a way of trying to actually get a show.
Get a live show.
Yeah, and we didn't expect that anyone was going to be interested. And we booked a record launch show, but in the meantime, I went off traveling. So I put on my backpack and went traveling through Thailand, Cambodia, Laos. And this was at a time where I didn't have an email address. I disappeared from off radar for a month, and I got back to Bangkok after traveling through the wilderness, and I called home, and they said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm in Thailand." Like, "Oh, there's people looking for you." Like, "Oh, really?" And they said, "Oh, your single's gone into the top 20," and I'm like,
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
But it was one of those quite interesting things that, yes, it did happen quickly, but already in those early days, and it certainly wasn't by design, but if people aren't available and people aren't accessible to talk to
Right.
try and fill in or understand the story, they create stories that are far more fanciful than anything that you could actually
Oh, yeah.
come up with yourself. But
Uh,
I think in some ways that kind of contributed to what people's impression of the band was, that I was always kind of disappearing off here, there, and everywhere,
Right.
and I was quite inaccessible.
Mhm.
And there was part of a lot of that was
Yeah.
a sense of discomfort and an earnestness that I approached my music with
Right.
at that point in time.
Well, journalism too is certainly sort of a weird element of entertainment in a lot of ways. It's like that's why I kind of like the medium that we work in, is the fact that we're not journalists. We're not getting a story for a magazine or any sort of blog or anything like that for a record distributor or anything like that. We're just doing it. We just talk to who we want to talk to. So you don't have.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that.
It is. It's
Yeah,
really cool.
It's nice that it's not, and that had to be kind of a weird element.
No, kind of what we were talking about a little earlier with maybe the mythos kind of disappearing with the emergence of, all of these new forms of media and ways of communicating. And I agree with that. But I have to say I'm embracing it pretty fully too. If I'm honest with myself, the fact that I'm talking to you right now,
Possible. Yep.
Absolutely. Look, I live on podcasts. I digest news and information that I wouldn't have been able to access before. And I think I've probably learnt, I've managed to kind of find my boundaries within that space to kind of just decide what I'm comfortable with and how much I interact with it.
Right.
And I think that's kind of the important thing for everyone, because there is it is a different world. I'm certainly not sure whether it's making the world a better place. I sometimes I worry about the platform that social media now gives voices that would probably have remained isolated. So it's fantastic for creating communities, but it's certainly, there's some dangerous communities that I think that it enables and it creates. So, for example, if I've got some horrendous bigoted view in 15, 20 years ago, my thinking wouldn't have been any different, but I would have been more considerate where I shared that, because it would have meant that I would have had to have looked at someone and felt confident enough in that relationship to be able to express that idea. Whereas now I can express that online, and it forms a community, and it's enabled and it's validated. And that worries me at times.
Yeah.
Come over here, you'll worry even more.
I hope you're enjoying the political shit show that we've got going on here in the U.S.
I heard a really interesting commentary the other day, and it was following the leaking of Donald Trump's letter to the Turkish president.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I suppose one of the troubling narratives that came out of that for me was, the inevitable question about his mental health. And it's like, well, hang on. I don't necessarily agree with the way that he's acting in many cases, but it still remains coherent. It's like it seems erratic to a lot of people who want to undermine it and want to dismiss it, but it's coherent within a particular ideological frame, and I think that's probably more more frightening rather than
Right.
trying to dismiss it as some kind of mental health issue. And he's still got a 40% approval rating,
Yeah.
which, even though that might be a bit low, that still means that 40%
Yeah,
of people think
it's high
that
enough.
what he's doing
Yeah.
is okay.
And that's where we get,
Yeah.
worried, is that it's that high of a percentage, and the dumbing down of a lot of us over here, and just systematic and over time pushing forward these messages like, you don't have to listen to anybody else, just listen
Mhm.
to us. We'll tell you everything you need to know. And anybody else that tries to tell you anything, they are a liar.
Right.
They are the devil. And how many people have bought into that? And it makes me really sad and very afraid at the same time. And, honestly, I laugh at them a lot of the time too. I shouldn't do that. And I'm working on it.
Well,
And I'm working on having like more
right.
conversation, an actual conversation with them.
The troubling part of, I think the troubling part about it is that as a political strategy and as a way of managing people, it's effective.
Right.
And if you look at Australian politics, our Prime Minister has followed a very similar
Mhm.
path to what Trump did, and Boris Johnson is doing exactly the same in the UK at the moment. It's like if you look at the narratives that he shares as opposed to what he's then doing, they're poles apart. And so it's become very effective in that populist strategy. It's become very effective, and so it's not just Donald Trump's legacy isn't going to be one that's just going to be measured in terms of domestic US politics. It's like it's impacted our last election, which ran in a very similar way, and I think UK politics is, Boris Johnson is following a similar path.
And I think the creepy thing about that in general too is just the way that it plays the system. Because if you look at the voter turnout in the U.S., it's really been poor.
Yeah.
For practically every election we have, we don't get enough youth votes. We don't get enough, of other people who are poor, or disenfranchised, or minority groups, things like that. They don't have the voice. So it's like manipulating that system to just eke out
Right.
an image of America that's the majority of us. It's like, no, it's really not, and it's not anywhere you go around here. But the squeaky wheel gets the grease. They know how to manipulate that system. They know how to set it up to get just enough to make it look like that's a majority. And Trump has used that in his playbook as well recently. With his showing his red state maps and I'm popular. I don't know.
Well, look, if you look at Dominic Cummings in the UK and Steve Bannon, two very, very, I think, similar figures sitting in the background of politics there, who understand. I think probably, if I look, they were remarkably intelligent how they used data that was available to them to then influence people's thinking. I don't like the way that they've done that, but purely intellectually, it's brilliant. It's brilliant manipulation. It's frightening. It's dystopian, but it's
Oh yeah. It really does feel like I'm living in an Orwell novel. It just and when are they going to come get me?
Yeah.
It worries me. I was curious, kind of just going back slightly. Do you think, like in Australia, voting, I believe, is compulsory?
It is.
Do you feel like that makes a difference, like from your perspective? Would that be something that you think might be of value here?
I think that so we get fined if we don't turn out to vote for elections, and it doesn't mean that everybody will. You get. It's the same thing. It's like you can drag a horse to water, but most of the people. So what we call the donkey vote, where people just scribble, draw a penis on the voting cards. That does account for about 10% of the vote, but you do get representative vote. So no one is excluded. So there is nothing that excludes people. So even if prisoners vote, people in hospitals vote, and everybody has the right to vote. And I do think it makes a difference. Absolutely, it feels like it makes a difference. Where if you look at, I suppose, the belt of voters that really swayed the election in Australia last time, it's not remarkably dissimilar to kind of the Rust Belt in the US. So in terms of, if you look at socioeconomics and even industries within those kind of those electoral areas, very similar in Australia. Very, very similar.
I'd sure like to give it a shot here. I mean, it sounds like if anything, I would just like to know what the truth is. What people are truly voting for. And I mean, and like you say, you're always going to have that, that sliver that's just not going to fall in any category, or people who, here are going to vote for Frosty the Snowman or whatever, but as a write-in candidate. But, still I think we would have a lot better hold on at least how much of an influence that is, things like voter intimidation or voter fraud, or I know that's not a big impact, but like as far as falsified vote, at least getting everybody, we know just aren't really able to get to the polls. They're not encouraged to vote.
Right. Well, and there are so many ways that we manipulate it all here, and it's kind of disgusting.
Yeah.
I remember becoming very excited many years ago when Jello Biafra ran. I can't even remember what it was that he ran in, but it was an election, and I don't know whether it was a mayoral election or what it was, but I remember being young thinking, yes, I want to be there just to be able to vote for Jello Biafra.
Right. Yeah.
I would.
Mm-hmm. Those don't tend to turn out well here. I don't know, like those celebrity participations. It was like Hunter Thompson worked to become the the mayor of Aspen, Colorado, or something. But it's kind of funny. His platforms were pretty fascist in a lot of ways. People didn't.
I could see Hunter Thompson being
kind of fascist
out there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bit scary and a bit disappointing.
Right.
I've probably moved a long way away from music right now, so
you're
welcome to pull me back at any point in time.
That's that's the nature of the beat.
That's what we do. Yeah. But that's where the interesting, where things are interesting. That's where we want to go. Yeah. I think we've talked about, we have some similarity in what we do most of the time.
Yes, we do.
For a profession. Right. And I think and I don't talk about my job a whole lot on here. I try and keep those separate for the most part. But I think you have to let people talk and let those conversations go where they're supposed to go instead of trying to force them anywhere. And that's where the interesting stuff usually happens, is when you don't stick up any walls and try and hold too many boundaries to where somebody can go.
I think one of the things that I struggled with music in terms of my was becoming identified with something, and I ended up finding myself becoming quite embarrassed that I was identified with music and particularly as it was a point of discomfort that I had to get through and actually learn to appreciate everything that I managed to be able to do and experience through music. But I remember going through a period of feeling really uncomfortable with how I was identified, and that sense that people will introduce, this is Hamish was in Cordrazine, and then this idea that they needed to kind of give my chart positions or something, rather than just like, this is Hamish.
No, just gonna say, I get that, even like on a much smaller plane. I used to do radio, and just being like part-time DJ at not a major market radio station, when I got introduced to new people, hey, this is Matt. He's a DJ at this radio station. right? And I'm like, you don't introduce other people
Right.
that way,
No.
and it kind of made me uncomfortable.
Oddly enough, so I decided to combat it by thinking I need to do something that is equally as identifiable. So anyway, I took up mountain climbing. That was my
There you
response to it. So I thought, okay, what's the most crazy thing that
Right.
people will say? This is Hamish. He's a mountain climber. So
He's a mountain climber.
so I took up mountain climbing because I didn't want to be. This is Hamish. Hamish's record. Blah, 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 blah.
Right.
It's like, okay, he's a mountain climber. And then I would just get, this is Hamish. He's just come back from climbing. And but I was at least happy with that because it was slightly more.
It's going to steer the conversation a different way. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But you've had many lives, like
Lots of hats. Yeah.
and that's fascinating to me, and I think that's really cool. I kind of envy that in some ways.
I am able to appreciate it now. I think at the time it was probably something that I endured and survived rather than being kind of emotionally and psychologically equipped to deal with. Because as I say, it was quite challenging. I think one of the things that made it challenging was how I would think about it as well. So I'm not saying that all of the challenges are things external to myself. I think my own psychology and my own psychological makeup and how I approach things didn't help. So there was an earnestness that I would bring to it, that I had this idea that if any time that I walked on stage, people should be able to experience that moment of creation that a song was trying to express. And that became quite traumatic after a while, because you're essentially just kind of, it's a ritual crucifixion.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to appreciate that what my relationship with the song was didn't necessarily mean that that's what another person's relationship with the song was. And just because a song might not have necessarily been dealing with something particularly cheery, that doesn't mean that for another person it wasn't something comforting and to be celebrated. So despite the fact that people would come to the shows and they would be engaged in something communal, it took me a long time to actually be able to appreciate that people walked away happy. And they didn't come to be sad. They didn't come to kind of wallow in distress or trauma, that they came to actually enjoy and celebrate the music.
Right.
So I think it took me a long time to come to terms with that and appreciate that. So I think that earnestness that I would bring to a performance, or felt that I owed people, and I think I also felt that I owed people that, because I had this way of looking at things, that people make a decision to sacrifice some of their hard-earned money, their weekly living allowance and their budget to spend to come and see me play. And so I felt a huge responsibility to people for that.
To deliver something,
Yeah, and to deliver that. And it became quite an isolating experience. It became quite isolating for me from friends, from family, and even from the other band members as well, because when your instrument is your body, it's your voice, well, in terms of being able to go out after a show or even do anything like that, it's not as easy for you to do, because if I then decide that I'm going to have a good night and I can't perform the next night, well, that's kind of not fair. Everyone loses out. So just as my physical participation in what it is that we were doing, it was just because of the nature of my instrument, different to what the other other band members' experience of it was. And I think the other part about it was traveling in a band and touring and making records. It's an odd experience. It's not in any way, shape or form normal, and it's unrelatable for anyone other than who is doing that And for me, I never wanted to complain about it because I realized that what I was doing was what I had dreamt of doing my whole life.
Sure.
And I also appreciated that what I was doing was what other people dreamt of doing and dreamed of doing. And so I didn't want to be one of those people that kind of got into that position and then complained about it. If you don't like it,
Right.
you leave something behind, and you don't smash other people's dreams just because the dream hasn't turned out the way that you had hoped it would. And that was, I think that was the thing, like what my dream of what I thought it would be, and then the reality when I arrived at that place that I'd dreamt of my whole life was completely different.
Yeah.
Sure, that has to be a little bit of a shock and a disappointment, and that would be hard to reconcile, I would imagine.
Well, and especially when you're younger, it's kind of easier now.
It's a lot easier now. At the time, it's trying to work out how to survive it. It's not even trying to reconcile the differences. How do I survive this, and what do I need to do? And the moment that you become even half successful in something, and there's a whole lot of people that have had far greater careers than what I have had. There's a lot of people that are investing in that. So I quit the band before our first album came out, and I was in the BMG building in New York, and it was in Times Square, and it overlooked the Chrysler building, and it was a remarkably, I think, probably a privileged perspective of the city that you got from there.
Sure.
And I think there was something quite psychologically powerful about the view that you got, and it was almost asking the question, or kind of saying, well, this could be yours. What are you what are you prepared to give for that? And I suppose it's almost Robert Johnson's going down to the crossroads and making that deal with the devil. And I felt at that moment, it was, what are you prepared, because it's going to take everything. It means that you're going to be, in a tour bus kind of going across the country, and you lose that connection from normal life. And I recognized in myself that I didn't think that I would like the person that I would have become if I had have continued, because you're surrounded with a lot of people that tell you very flattering things about yourself, that's really lovely, but I'm not as great as what you're trying to tell me that I am.
Right.
And I know that.
I would imagine there would be like that fear of loss of being able to know if somebody's really there and wanting to know you for the right reasons. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And there is an aspect of that. There's certainly an aspect of that. You wonder, you question people's motivations. For me, the important things in life are the creation of memory and with people that you love, and that's friends, family, intimate partners, and that to me is the most important thing. For me, the idea of a successful life is being able to sit silently with a person that I care about and not say a word, but just share a smile and a glance at each other and know that you're both thinking the same thing. You share that moment. It's like if you think, if you go to a movie, it's if you come out of the cinema, it's the moment of asking a person, what did you think of that? It's sitting on a mountain and looking at a sunrise and being able to just share that. So it's that shared experience. And I thought how I was doing these amazing things, but in terms of creating memories that I would value for a lifetime, it was no different than when I'd put on my backpack and I'd go traveling by myself. I would experience extraordinary things, but then I'd come home and it's fine. You can tell people stories about what you got up to, but it's not the same as being able to sit down and enjoy a shared experience with someone that you care about. So that was that moment where I just thought, that's it. And I quit the band. The record was finished, but it was due to be released in a few months' time. And look, people weren't happy with me. No one was happy with me.
I bet not.
and understandably, people's reactions were quite extreme to, you've taken my life away type of response.
Well, that would be part of the pressure of it too, is all these people suddenly in a very real way depending on you, or feeling that they do. Like what he does affects us.
Yeah, and in all honesty, it's at the time I probably I'd constructed I suppose a protective narrative around myself as well, which is, if I don't want to do this, I will stop. I'm not going to just continue if I don't believe in it. But I also reflect now, like, stopping it I was terrified, because I'd found myself in a position that I was reliant upon myself as well. So just as much as other people were reliant upon me, I was reliant upon myself because of this thing. These just a few songs that you sit in your lounge room and write, they create something that then needs to be fed.
Right.
Now, I didn't have the faith or belief that I was going to be able to feed that thing. I didn't believe that I was a good songwriter. I felt fraudulent in the place that I ended up in. And so I thought, well, it's kind of better just to walk away from it, and then you've never failed.
Right. Yeah. You get that. Yeah. Don't have to worry about that. Yep. So how old were you exactly with the first record?
I think 20, the classic rock age, 27.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
It really was that.
Oh, well, you had your symbolic death as opposed to.
I did, and I suppose that's again because I wasn't accessible, so I just disappeared. There was no announcements. There was never anything like that. And I just disappeared again, and then once again, people decide they create the narrative for you, because people like to explain things, and I suppose it's that same idea of a conspiracy theory. If we don't know something, then we will create something to try and give ourselves a sense of knowing and understanding, and even if it's untrue, it still reduces the discomfort of uncertainty and not knowing. So at least, and again, that sense of myth grew out of that again, which is Hamish is this person who doesn't like the spotlight, and I suppose because you've been successful for a period, people then kind of talk about a perception of talent. Now, all of that I think was always overblown, but at the same time, I'm appreciative of it, because I think that the story that got created around that time has allowed me to continue to do music now.
Yeah.
I think there's something about that somewhat of a curiosity in a sense.
Yeah. So did you always kind of keep music in the background, or was it something you had to shake that off for a while? And when do you think you came back around to the idea?
I always continued to do music, and it was just it never disappeared. It would either kind of turn up as being some electronic stuff, or it would just, I realized that I was happy playing music for myself, and I didn't really have that need to share it. It wasn't really that important to me, but at the same time, I'm fortunate that I still get to record and make music, which is something that I love doing. So it never went away. And every now and then I get a little sense of excitement of wanting to play a live show or two, and I'll get a band together and we'll rehearse, and then and then I'll play the first show and I'll get excited and I think we should do this again, and then I'll play the second show and I'll say I don't want to play that anymore.
Yeah.
So it's an odd relationship that I have with it. My favorite thing at the moment is that I've got a young daughter and I sing with her or at her every day. So that's the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
That to me is makes me totally complete.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
She's beautiful, by the way. Just the pictures I've seen.
Oh, thank you. It's extraordinary how much a little person who can't talk can teach you about yourself.
right.
And any emotional vulnerability, it's like you think that music and being in a public spotlight can teach you about, the fragility of your psychology. My God, becoming a parent does that more than anything.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember looking at her at one point in time and feeling this sense of needing to elicit love from this little person. I thought, oh gee, that's
Yeah.
you've got to keep that in check.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's certainly one that you have to feed. You can't go off backpacking. Well, you can, but it doesn't turn out well for them.
No. She's a remarkably well-travelled little tot at the moment. She's already been to China and Europe and all over the place. So.
That's important. I think being well-traveled is just as important as being well-read. I really do.
I agree.
A lot.
Totally.
By traveling around and being exposed to different things, different cultures. Absolutely.
We have not traveled abroad as a family. I would like to do that
need to.
sometime.
Absolutely.
I know.
Come visit.
Oh, you're going to put us up? We need a place to stay.
We've got room.
All right.
I've been to. I was actually in Australia for the Olympics.
Ah.
Very briefly, I came down for a week. I had a friend. Actually, it's a friend who initially introduced me to Cordrazine.
Wow.
So if it weren't for her, I wouldn't be talking to you.
No, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah.
So I should give a quick shout out. Lisa, love you, miss you.
And I should say thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's a really cool friend, but she invited me down. She lived in Gold Coast. Yeah, so it came down and...
That was 2000, wasn't it?
Yep. So 20 years almost. It's hard to think that.
It is quite a challenge for my memory to stretch that back.
I was going to ask him the year. I had no idea.
Yeah, no, it was just before whole 9/11 even.
Travel issues.
Yes, they're those iconic moments in human history that you always remember. I'll never forget. I got up for work in the morning and turned on the television and to watch the news, which is what I always do, or turn on the radio to listen to the news. And I couldn't believe what I saw. And I'm sure my experience is no different to anyone else, that I sat and consumed every bit of information that I possibly could, trying to make sense of what was going on.
Yeah, that was the big thing for me. I think it was confusing, extremely confusing. We were seeing what was going on. I was actually working with my dad on a construction job at that time, and it was a remodel in someone's home, and they had the TV on. We were just really trying to figure out that day. It's like, do we keep working? Do we go home? Do we, what do we do?
Yeah, what do you do?
I remember bill collectors and things here in the U.S. calling, well, not bill collectors, but like companies that I had credit lines with that were like, do you still plan on paying your bills after this catastrophe? And we're like, well, yeah, I think so. Yeah, they didn't even know.
I think the way that you explained that then is probably captures, because any motivation to engage in anything normal that I was meant to, like to go to work, any motivation to do anything other than just sit there and watch and see this unfold just left me. And I couldn't distract myself. I had to consume it in some way. And if it wasn't sitting in front of a television, then it had to be listening to it on the radio. It's like, but I had to consume this information, and I couldn't leave it. And it was debilitating. It was debilitating to the point where I couldn't motivate myself to distract myself in any way.
Well, yeah, it was a pandemic, though. I mean, that was kind of the kickoff of 24-hour news too here in America, where we had a couple networks before, but now it was like news was constantly running new angles in a story all day and all night. It wasn't just a news program that you tuned into or a channel that ran the same news every 20 minutes,
You mean Ron Burgundy didn't start 24-hour news?
No, but doesn't him. I don't think so. But yeah, like
Oh, I'm quite disappointed. I'm disappointed to hear that.
but yeah, like the crawlers going across the bottom of the screen. I remember those being burned.
Yeah.
It's like, where do these come from?
Yeah.
He's talking to me and I have to read this. And then now it's just second nature. You turn into a news program. There's 3 talking heads on the side, a crawler going this way, one going that way, 2 stories running in the corner. It's just crazy.
Right. But that's kind of the world we live in. And then you wonder why, our kids can't sit down and play a board game anymore.
I know it's sad, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Being at that point of thinking about the world and parenting, just how difficult it is. It's like when I grew up, there was maybe one telephone in the hallway and there might have been one in the kitchen. And if someone wanted to talk to me, then they'd have to ring up and they'd have an uncomfortable conversation with my parents and say, "Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Cowan, is Hamish home?" And then they'd have to probably endure. It's like, "And how are you, Johnny?" It's like, "Are you doing okay today? How's your mum doing? What are they up to?" Just hold on one moment and I'll go and get Hamish. But there was a level of control over your environment that you had. It's like there was a television, or if you were lucky, there was 2 televisions, and what the content of that was controlled by whatever your parents decided that they were happy for you to watch. And then when you went to bed, there was a book. Or, if you were going to be naughty, then you had to be naughty by staying awake and reading a book. Or if you had some kind of dodgy magazine of some description. But other than that, and information there was control over information that you just don't have now as a parent. It's like, so information enters your house and data enters your house. You've got no control over it, and even if you do try and control it, then the concern, how does that then impact on your children and their social engagement? And so there's a whole lot of complexity within that is
right, and that whole challenge of we need to, I'm recognizing as a parent, I need to learn to help my kid manage this effectively as he grows up, and realizing I don't even exactly know what that means for me because this is all new territory. So I've got to decide what's the best approach to get my kid through this and get him to be responsible with it as he grows.
Yeah.
But it's also uncharted territory.
I mean, one thing I found that's really strange about it was when my eldest kid turned 16 and it's possible to go get a driver's license here in the US 16, and she didn't care to, didn't bother. She had all of her friends on video chat. She could talk to them whenever she wanted to, see their faces. They were playing online games together in the evening. So why would I bother to, drive all the way over to their house? Or, and part of me was conflicted saying, okay, well, she's staying off the road. Dangerous out there to drive. I don't have to pay for insurance. I don't have to buy her a car yet.
Yeah.
So some of that's safer. But then again, it's like, I can remember being a kid that age and thinking, I couldn't wait to get my license. I couldn't wait to get a car, get away from my house, and go drive wherever I wanted. But it's huge.
I suppose that reflects our physical participation, and participation now doesn't require us to be physically as engaged as what it once was. It's like, online communities are legitimate communities, and they are remarkably important to young people. I think we,
absolutely,
kind of our generation, would do better to actually try and understand just how important they are to young people. It's something that's really important if we are actually going to be able to support young people and still be able to guide them. Because if we don't understand, we're at that age where young people are more proficient with technologies than what we are, and there is, there's still the moral framework of how do we support them to be able to navigate all of the emotional and kind of the moral and ethical complexities of community. It's like society's rules are the same. They're all of the things that are important in terms of people respecting each
Right.
other are
Mm-hmm.
no different. So yeah, I suppose it's just the platform and the medium looks different.
Yeah. And I mean, kind of like Matt was saying earlier too, it's it's both a blessing and a curse. It's like we've also got some friends who were doing an EP release party in Dallas, so pretty far away from us. And there's no way we could get away to get there. But I went and visited him, what, a week or so ago, and went to his house, and we were able to watch the live stream uh, of the show together in Kansas City. And there we are
Yeah.
seeing our friends play, and it's really great. And that's something we couldn't experience, if we didn't have that social media connection.
No, and that's true. It's like I will sit and watch things, but again, it's like it's supporting young people and making sure that we are able. I think it's too easy to get lost in the technology and lose that ultimately we are people that are
Yeah.
using that, and that we're still useful in terms of what we have to offer. I've got
Okay.
to nick into the studio, but I feel like we haven't finished talking yet.
Right.
I'm happy to catch up again and continue our conversation.
Yeah.
We would love
We could do
to.
a part 1 and 2.